What is the biggest problem in paganism? Unsighted gnosis. I've mentioned this in multiple videos in the past. One of the biggest problems, if not the biggest problem, in paganism in the modern day is unsighted gnosis. Gnosis is your personal interpretation, what you've divined, your personal praxis, things that may be specific to your religion that aren't necessarily within the direct sources, or it's how you interpret the direct sources. Unfortunately, what happens is a lot of people, a lot of web gurus, a lot of spiritual authors, they won't tell you that something is their interpretation or the way they do something, and they take something as though it is like divine mandate and that they intuited it from the ether and are imparting that wisdom upon you. One of the most notorious authors of this is Edward Thorson, aka Stephen Flower. Prime example of this. This is somebody that has written multiple books, one of which has the same exact name as a historical text, and he completely makes things up whole cloth. His background is that he's a ceremonial magician. Because of the symbolism that he wants and has interpreted, he gives us 9 parts of the self when there's about 4. The 9 worlds are another one. There's like 9-ish. It's never actually listed as 9, and sometimes the names are a little bit more vague. Sometimes they mesh together, like Niflheim and Hell sometimes get combined or separated depending on what you're reading or who's interpreting it. And unfortunately, because of the history of how paganism developed, specifically here in the West, through Victorian spiritualism, and then later a lot of these revivalist reconstruction movements that really didn't have a whole lot to go on, and they ended up filling in a lot of the gaps with Wicca. Not to slam Wicca too hard, it is valid. However, it is rampant with misinformation. Particularly, it was founded by Gerald Gardner. Gerald Gardner was an English Freemason, and that is supposedly, according to himself, where he got Wicca from. And if you go back further, Freemasonry has roots in Hermeticism. Hermeticism is a medieval magical philosophy. Things like Hermeticism and Freemasonry and these other philosophies that take a lot from the Egyptian didn't have a whole lot to go on, didn't really become a thing until the Rosetta Stone was found. Well, that was Napoleon's reign. Napoleon's army found the Rosetta Stone, and then that's the thing that allowed people to even read the hieroglyphics and even understand what the Egyptians were even saying. Prior to the Rosetta Stone, the Corpus Hermeticum was translated in 1460, but that comes from Hellenic Greek texts. It wasn't until after the discovery of the Rosetta Stone that Egyptian Orientalism became a big thing. Hermeticism did exist previous to the discovery of the Rosetta Stone, but the Corpus Hermeticum was also very shrouded in mystery, and we still don't entirely know where it came from, but it does look like it came from the Hellenic period whenever the Ptolemaic Greeks were colonizing Egypt. So it was not an Egypt proper philosophy. However, it was probably inspired by some Egyptian philosophy. We just don't know how much. So as you can see, it's a pretty new thing. A lot of these philosophies, a lot of these magical systems, these traditions really come from modern sources. And there's nothing wrong with something being modern. Just say that it's modern. Because the thing is, citing your gnosis holds us accountable. Citing where you got certain information, what source it comes from, holds us accountable. It maintains a certain standard. And without that standard, you can make something up whole cloth. I mean, technically you could make up an entire religion, maybe break into science fiction first. But the important thing is to tell people where that information actually came from. Don't make up some golden tablets in order to tell people that you're more valid than you actually are. And the thing is, just because something is modern doesn't mean it's less valid, and just because something is ancient doesn't mean it's more valid. Chaos magic is another good example of that. It's a very interesting philosophy that uses a lot of modern psychology and applies it to the occult and magical systems. And for that matter, most likely, a lot of the ancient lore, the sagas, mythologies, etc., are probably the gnosis of their day, interpreted from older myths and older traditions. I've gone over ad nauseum on my channel how connected and similar a lot of mythology is. This doesn't mean, of course, that there's not a lot of unique things specific to those cultures that evolved with them, but that is part of the evolution of things. If you read a lot of the lore, you will notice that there's a certain dream logic to it. In a dream, I might hyperfixate on, I have to do this thing because there's a certain thought that my mind is fixating on during that dream, and I'm heading towards that. And you'll notice within magical systems that there's a lot of symbolism. Symbolism is key when it comes to magic as well as spirituality. An oak tree doesn't literally represent Thor. However, it kind of looks like lightning, so it's associated with thunderers where oak trees grow. With Baldur's death, we see a lot of hyper-masculine ego, a figure that believed himself invulnerable, that had this small, insignificant weakness. This very weak, floppy plant is a parasite on trees, really, was able to kill him because it was an oversight. Similar with Achilles and his tendon. Hyper-masculine figure, hero, warrior, marked all the masculine boxes, what we would consider Drengar, still had this small oversight that got him killed. Those both kind of cover that dream logic, right? That symbolism. The thing that makes the gnosis of the archheathens more valid is the fact that it reflects the religion that we are trying to reconstruct today. The values, beliefs, praxis of the archheathens is reflected in those stories and is obviously an unbroken chain coming from those earlier forms of those polytheisms, of those religions. And if you look at debates in the ancient world, people didn't always agree. There's a figure called Kettle Trout or Kettle Salmon, depending on the translation. And Kettle doesn't honor Odin. In fact, he ends up fighting a berserker, and that's one of the things that comes up. So even in archheathen times, not everybody agreed on the same gnosis. Not everybody was on the same page. And you'll see variations in different regions and different poems throughout time. And it's plausible that that dream logic reflects a lot of the ecstasis, the trance work that probably went into the religious aspect of divining and intuiting these stories. It was likely the dreams, the trance work of these ecstatic practitioners. Seith Kona, Volva, Vitki, people that practice Seithr, things that are lost to us now, but we can kind of infer with that ancillary evidence, with the little signs that are here and there, like the dream logic. All that is to say that we should not appeal to the past. We should not do everything in our power to try to make these ancient ghosts of the archheathens happy when we really don't know what they would have wanted. And a lot of the things in the modern day have to adapt to modern morality and sensibility. So as I've said before, just because something is ancient doesn't mean it's more valid, and just because something is new doesn't mean it's less. However, the ancient gnosis, the stories, the lore, does reflect that religion that we are trying to recreate, and we will learn more from that than we will from Bjorn Schmuckatelli making some shit up, somebody basing everything on their modern gnosis. There's a difference in one of these online web gurus making up their own interpretations, their own lore, in order to fulfill some agenda, because that happens all the time. And we don't want to do that either. And by accrediting and citing where that gnosis comes from, where that praxis comes from, where your beliefs come from, and what influenced those, we can do away with that web guru mentality. If I can explain why, for example, I feel the urge to pass the horn to the right, which is part of my personal gnosis, then it becomes less of me trying to speak as though my gnosis is authority. Your gnosis is not authority. Your gnosis works for you. There's a big difference in that. And I cannot iterate enough that your personal gnosis does not make you any kind of authority. I don't know how many times I have had to deal with somebody, especially online, that thinks that their personal gnosis gives them some kind of special ear to the gods and makes them special, or they might be the incarnation of Odin or some other god. For some reason, it's almost always Odin. Even if you 100% think that your gnosis makes you special, it does not. I don't know your gnosis. Your gnosis doesn't affect me. Your gnosis is a personal thing. It affects your personal path. It fulfills your needs. It does not fulfill my needs. And nobody should be lording their gnosis above anybody else. That's how you get cults. That's how you get the heathen version of David Koresh. That's how you get some of these big personalities with big followings. Your gnosis may be special to you, and you do have inherent worth as a person. However, your gnosis does not make you special. And I cannot iterate enough that your gnosis definitely doesn't make you special to other people. You might have great ideas, and sharing those great ideas is awesome. One of the things with gnosis we should discuss, right? And again, that's part of citing it. Cite what your gnosis is, and don't crap on each other for having a modern belief, for not deciding to appeal to the past. There are certain things within the arch-heathen worldview that we should throw out. Things like ergi, things like thralls. The arch-heathens weren't perfect. They didn't have germ theory. They didn't have running water. They might have been great for their time, but we have progressed past that. Certain things about modern life are terrible. Discard those too. Learn from the past and push your way forward. Take what is useful, discard what is useless. So when you are developing your own personal gnosis, you have to understand that a lot of your path is going to be specific to you, and that's perfectly okay. You don't have to have some ancient tradition. And in all likelihood, if somebody introduces you to an ancient tradition, it's probably not that ancient. One carryover from Freemasonry to Wicca is the degree system. Similar to degrees of a compass, they have degrees of rank. You will see that in a lot of trad witch groups. So the trad part really isn't that trad. Similarly, in heathenry, theodism actually comes from Saxe Wicca, another huge influence that makes them think that they are some ancient tradition because Garmin Lord had some vision, and subsequently, because it's passed on from person to person as though it were some ancient tradition, people believe it to be. So in summation, always cite your sources, always look for their sources, ask for sources. Another really big thing in heathenry is runes. Runes are rampant with unsighted personal gnosis. The only source we have for the meanings of the runes is the rune poems themselves. And with Tawaz, one reference in Sigdrifamal. There's also other vague references in Sigdrifamal, but those runes aren't named. Only Tawaz is named. So if you're looking up something like the rune, and people aren't mentioning the rune poems, that's a red flag. They are probably citing somebody else's gnosis, who is citing somebody else's gnosis, who is citing somebody else's gnosis, creating a daisy chain of unsighted personal gnosis, no accountability whatsoever, and people are just making things up whole cloth. Like we know that Ewaz means horse and is etymologically connected via the Proto-Indo-European root to the word equestrian. It just means horse. But somebody the other day on the subreddit asked if it meant progress. Well, technically you could interpret horse to mean progress, right? Horses move forward. Moving forward is a kind of progress, but interpreting horse to get to the point where you think it means progress is your personal interpretation. That is gnosis. The only thing it actually means, according to the Norwegian, Icelandic, and Anglo-Saxon rune poems, is horse. And with that, be better tomorrow than you were yesterday by citing your gnosis. Skull.